Hello there, I'm Nathalia Melo, your unfiltered fit BFF, mom of two turned CEO of a fitness empire. Someone who understands the struggles of trying to stay fit, sane, and sexy, all while juggling work, life, and motherhood. And this is the Unfiltered Fit Life podcast. Follow along wherever you're listening and join me weekly as I help busy working moms just like you simplify their fitness journey so they can lose weight, regain their confidence, and feel sexy AF. It's time to stop living in the what ifs and hiding from the cameras. It's time to regain control over your body, feel sexy naked, and wear a bikini confidently. People already see you as a super confident woman, but it's time for you to feel the same way too. Let's go. Hello there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Unfiltered Fit Life podcast. And today we have an incredible guest. Her name is Sarah Blodgett. I might have butchered that, but she's going to tell me in a little bit. And Sarah got my attention on Instagram because at first when I saw her stuff, it got me mildly triggered. Because if you guys know me, you're going to know why as we start to talk to her. But what I found fascinating was that the things that she was saying about feminine and masculine energy, which is well aware, today's topic is going to be very controversial, especially for women like me. So I really want everybody to be very open-minded to this conversation because I think that there is a lot to be learned. Even for myself doing this interview with Sarah. And Sarah is the owner of Everyday Starlet. Welcome to the podcast, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm very excited. And I think I'm going to be your I'm sure that you probably had other tough cookies kind of interviewers because I find that this topic is very controversial. And I think that that's why it's so good to speak to you about it because I find that you have a very cohesive way of explaining it.
Oh, thank you.
Can you explain to us a little bit what is feminine and masculine energy?
Okay, so feminine and masculine energy, the way I look at it, because I think in our society, we tend to have a very superficial take on it. So we tend to think of like feminine energy as being like femininity. It's like just being very girly, and that's what the definition is, or being a submissive housewife or something like that. And masculinity is just like what kind of car a man drives, how much muscles does he have? What does he drive for a car? Like that kind of thing. And for me, when I talk about energies, I'm talking more about something that's just deeper within us. So masculine and feminine energies are energies that live within all of us. We all actually have both energies within us, but we have a core energy. That's the one that we just feel like we're most ourselves in. And it's the one that we sort of operate at our best. Statistically speaking, most women are going to be feminine at their core and most men are going to be masculine at their core. Doesn't mean that we don't have a connection to the opposite energy. It just means that that's the energy that we're going to feel just that we operate our best in. Women can use feminine or masculine energies, but for most women, when they're operating in their feminine, it's going to feel more like they're coming back to themselves. Whereas for most men, they can operate from masculine or feminine energies, but for most of them, they're going to feel like when they're in their masculine, that's when they're at their best self. So it's really more of an energetic thing than it is like a superficial thing, which I think is one of the things that I think we get caught up in our society, and why I think so many people get triggered by it is because they start to think like, oh, feminine energy, that means you're going to tell me like I have to wear pink and I have to get my nails done and I have to do this. And, for men to be masculine, they have to have a checklist of things. And it's like, well, it's deeper than that. It's really more about the energy that we have within us.
Okay. So that's helpful. But are there like characteristics that you can, obviously we cannot generalize because ultimately we're talking about everybody is different, but are there like core characteristics that you would assign or align with what feminine energy would be and what masculine energy would be?
So feminine and masculine energy, if you think about it, every culture has terminology for this stuff. It's kind of always existed since the beginning of time. There's the yin and the yang, there's the Shakti and Shiva. There's all kinds of different ways that we think about it. It's really like opposite polarities that exist, but they work together. So if you think about it, I think of like the masculine as being the structure. It tends to be the giver, the protector, the provider, that kind of thing. Whereas the feminine is more about flow. It's more about creativity. It's receiving. It's opening, that kind of thing. The way I really love to describe it is like the masculine is like the cup, so it holds the structure. The feminine is like the liquid, the water within the cup that kind of flows around. So it still has freedom, but it's still like protected by the masculine structure. And also, if you think about it too, like in our basic human biology, which I know nowadays we can't really talk about biology anymore because everyone's so controversial
Do
about
be
that. But
facts.
in
Do be facts.
in basic human biology, the most basic thing that we do as men and women is to make babies. The masculine is the giver. He's the penetrator. He is the one who gives, and the feminine is the one who opens and receives, then creates the baby, then births the baby, and then you have the masculine that protects and provides for the child. And it's like, I mean, if we all just went back to cave people, that's pretty much
But
what would
are there
happen.
characteristics that you can attribute that it is something that is more aligned with what a feminine energy would be like, with somebody being in their feminine energy and with somebody being in their masculine energy? Are there characteristics of behaviors or things that we can see and be like, oh, that person probably is operating from a feminine or masculine energy?
So for a masculine being, if someone's operating their masculine, that tends to be like the list maker, the person that has the structure, that makes the lists, that is the doer, is the achiever. Like that's all masculine energy, which men and women can both exhibit. Whereas more feminine energy would be someone who's like, I'm going to go with the flow. I'm going to move with intuition. I'm going to move from my own instinct. I'm not necessarily going to have a plan for the next move, but I'm going to kind of flow intuitively with the way that life brings to me, which again, men and women can exhibit those things. But for most women, they're going to feel more comfortable when they're sort of in that flow naturally. Whereas for most men, they're going to feel more themselves in more structure and discipline.
It's interesting, this conversation. I'm just going to go a bit on a tangent because I do have, me personally, I have a very strong personality. I'm very direct, and I would say that I have a lot of the characteristics that would be probably associated with a more masculine energy.
Mm-hmm. Many women today do, so that you're not like uncommon. It's very common.
But here's the kicker, though, which is interesting, is that whenever I met my husband, I was trying to find, beside the fact that he's a very good looking man, I was trying to find what it was that attracted me to him. And I remember an episode that I told him that I was going to go get a pedicure. And then he goes, "You're going to go get what?" And I'm like, "A pedicure." And he's like, which one is that? Is it like the hands or the feet? And he's always been very like non-feminine man. He was a rugby player, like testosterone freaking flying all over the place with all those men. And then I'm like, isn't that interesting? Because I would have a very masculine energy, but whenever I felt attracted to him, it was the fact that he was oozing masculinity.
Mm-hmm. Because he could out masculine you.
Yes. Yeah, which is very very interesting. So you mentioned in one of the things from the masculine energy, there is the provider.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So here's my question for you. We are living in a time where 29% of women make as much as their husbands. And then you have 16% of women that are breadwinners. And I don't think this is going to change. It is just a dynamic that is happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, how can you keep the polarity at home when you have women who are literally financial, like 45% of the US households have women earning the same or more? That's a big number. So how do you keep that polarity when the men are no longer providers?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can look at that. I would say one of the big things is that we're probably, as a society, I think it's happening now, is we really have to expand what we think of in the word of provider. Because I think when we throw around the word provider, we kind of automatically associate it with financial, and that's we need money. We need money to survive. So it's like the financial aspect of things is not irrelevant, but it's also not the only aspect of a relationship dynamic. And I think like you even mentioned when you were talking about your husband is, you have a lot of masculine characteristics, which a lot of women today do because we live in a masculine oriented society. So most of us have grown up, especially like, our generation and, I think girls even a little bit younger, a little bit older, like that's kind of, we've been sort of groomed to be more masculine in this world. And that's just kind of the way that we've adjusted to things. But the reality is that as women, we can have that masculine energy when, we show up at work or when we show up and we do things. We can have that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But for most women, when they meet a partner, they're going to want to be able to relax and soften with him. So there's that aspect of things. And it's difficult because so many men are not really being initiated into their masculine or coached to be masculine in the same way that women are, which I think is going to be a long-term issue for us as a society. However, most women now, because they're more masculine, are going to want a man who is going to be able to out-masculine them so that when they do come home and they are home in the family structure, as a woman, they can now soften so that he can be the one that steps into the masculine role of the leadership, holding the structure, things like that. And if he can provide that for her, even if she is providing part of the financial aspects of things, then he's providing value to her. It doesn't necessarily have to be just that he is making the money, although I will say I do think that I think we are going to see some struggles as far as relationship dynamics with women earning so much more money. But like you said, that's probably not going to change anytime soon. But we also need to understand that, protecting and providing for a family is not solely just bringing home a paycheck and beating down intruders. I mean, like there's more to that aspect to things than just that. And if a woman is coming home to a man who's just kind of like, I'm just going to go with the flow, I'm just going to see how things go, somebody who just kind of doesn't really have any ambition or anything like that, I think a lot of women are going to be like, what is he, not to use the cliche, but like, what is he bringing to the table? Like, it's going to kind of be like, okay, I can't really respect him if he's not like doing something, but that doesn't necessarily have to mean that he is bringing in a paycheck. And there's something to the aspect that for men, for the masculine, for people who are masculine core beings, they're going to need a purpose in life. Like we all kind of need a purpose, but they need to have a purpose in life, like a greater purpose it's greater than themselves. It's greater than just their family. It's greater than something. And so some of those things are not going to be as financially profitable as other things.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's like if a woman comes home to a man who is, I don't know, doing something in the world that is making the world a better place and is actually, living his full purpose, but he may not be making a ton of money at that, she's still going to be able to respect him because he's living his purpose. And it's not necessarily going to be about like, well, I brought in this much money and you brought in this much money. It's like he's living his purpose and she's living her purpose, and they come together as a family, and she can still respect him because he's not, it's not that he's taking on the feminine role. It's just, they can still have that polarity in a relationship. As I don't think I mentioned polarity in this, is that in order to have sexual polarity in a relationship, you need one partner to be masculine, one partner to be feminine. Doesn't mean that they have to be that way all the time. It means that when they're together, one partner is going to take on the more masculine structure and one partner is going to take on the more feminine receptivity. So you can have those things and be whatever kind of energy you need to be in whatever moment. And, in your workplace, a lot of people, I'm not a parent, but I do talk to people who are parents where it's like, and you have kids, you have to be in whatever energy the kids need you to be in. And that may be more masculine, that may be more feminine. I mean, you got to be that. But when you're with your partner, can you step into your feminine and let him take the lead sometimes? I mean, maybe sometimes you need to step into the masculine and maybe lead him at certain times. I mean, depending on the dynamic of your relationship, but you're going to need people to be able to be in that polarized relationship in order to have that polarity that keeps people together.
hmm No, I love that you mentioned that like providing is much more than just providing financially, because there is probably, I think there is nothing sexier than whenever my husband goes and starts like building shit. I'm like, ooh, that's sexy, dad. You know
Yes.
what I mean? Like,
Yes.
oh my god, building, cutting the lawn. I'm like, ooh, yeah. Like I have a window right here in front of my
Hmm.
office, and I see him cutting the grass. I'm like, ooh, that's sexy. And he's like, I'm
Hmm.
just cutting the grass, and I'm like, just keep on doing it. I'll watch. and
Exactly.
and and these are gender roles, things that like from my personal belief are just complete like that's ridiculous, but I find it sexy, even
Yeah.
though I'm somebody who would have a more masculine energy than a lot of other women. So
Hmm.
it's very interesting to see that is still very much true for me.
Hmm.
And a lot of the ladies do that are probably listening to this podcast. So, Sarah, do you have any practical tips to share? Because a lot of the ladies listening to this podcast, a lot of the ladies who follow my work, they would be very like career driven, like very successful. Many of them are breadwinners. So, what tips would you give to a woman who needs to be on her masculine energy most of the day, but to not let that affect her family life? What would be your practical tips to a woman like that?
Well, I mean, it's not always easy. And I think one aspect of the masculine that many women take on today, which isn't necessarily a healthy aspect, is perfectionism. So I think one of the things is working through feeling like everything needs to be perfect all the time, which is something I think probably every person, but I think especially women today really kind of need to let go of a little bit and realize that, just simply the aspect of, I get to ask this a lot where people will be like, can you give women some practical tips on how to be feminine? I'm like, well, literally the act of me giving people a checklist of things to do and having them check off the list, I'm like, that's kind of taking them out of their feminine. So like, it is what it is. But I understand that there's a lot of women out there for whom like that idea. I mean, I used to be, I'm still a kind of a list person, to be honest with you, but I'm less obsessed with my checklist than I used to be, but I used to be an obsessive checklist person, so I get it. But I think first of all, understanding that you're not necessarily going to do everything right all the time, and you got to kind of give yourself a little bit of a break when you don't have everything all figured out. But one of the biggest things that I see that I think could really help so many women is having some kind of a ritual, and it's going to vary from woman to woman. It's some kind of a ritual where when you're done with work and you're either getting ready to see your partner or spend time with your family or maybe go on a date or whatever your situation is to have some kind of a ritual that just gets you out of that masculine headspace, because the masculine is the mind. The masculine's always in the head. The masculine is the thinking. The feminine is the body. The feminine is the feeling and stuff. It's more of, think about it like the masculine is the brain and the feminine is the heart. So something that drops you into your body, and that can vary from woman to woman. For some women, it's just simply like taking a shower or a bath or something like that, and like connecting with like just feeling the water and being in your body. So for some women, it's a very popular one. It's just like turn on a song, like use your intuition and pick a song, like whatever song like you feel like just fits your mood in that moment. Like if you had a tough day at work, maybe it's an angry song, or if you just want to feel sexy, maybe it's like a really sensual song or something. Just put on a song and just move to that song. Like do whatever it is that song moves you to do, and you have that whatever 3 minutes or something that a song is, where you just literally just drop into your body and you move your body any way that feels right in that moment. And what that does is it connects you into your body, so you're not in your head anymore. And it's that ritual of saying, okay, I'm done with the masculine stuff today. I'm going to now shift, and like this is my regular life. Like this is my time to be feminine, and it just kind of gets you out of that mind and into the body.
I love that. And I love like this is something that I personally had to start doing because I would come out of work like guns blazing in full on work mode. And my husband would like look at me and he'd be like, too intense, too intense. Do you need to have like this intense conversation right now? And that was like my keyword to be like, okay, tone it down, tone it down.
Yeah.
And Sarah, so because what I'm seeing is we come, from an era where women were just seen as homemakers.
Mm-hmm.
There was an era where women were all homemakers, and that's like they started voting. Not we started voting not too long ago, like in the grand scheme of things.
Right.
And then the pendulum swung all the way to the other side with a lot of like ultra feminist movements, which I do think that there is a lot of value in what was accomplished, because if you weren't for a lot of that, we wouldn't even be able to vote.
We wouldn't even be able to have this conversation right now. Like we wouldn't be able to have a podcast and talk publicly because we would be, seen and not heard type of thing. Yeah.
Correct. Which is still what happens in many other places in the world. And so, how do you find what would be that, like, your strategy or things that you'd suggest somebody to ask themselves to make sure that they are not kind of going with the crowd? Before, because the norm was to be a homemaker, then most women would just be like homemakers. And I say just, not because it is less than, but it's nothing other than is working from home. And then the pendulum swung the complete opposite. So how do we find that happy medium so that we're not kind of having to water ourselves down just to match a specific energy that is expected from us? Does that my question make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think that that's a common fear. And I think that comes up a lot when I bring up the concept of feminine energy. I think there's a lot of people that are like, oh no, I don't want to get stuck in the home and just be a housewife and this and that, which, look, I think housewives are amazing. I think being a mom is amazing. I think if that's what people dedicate their lives to, I think that's an amazing thing. I don't think that that's necessarily for everybody. And I think that was part of the problem. And that's a problem with both masculine and feminine is the idea of our society that tells men that there's one way to be masculine and women that there's one way to be feminine. And then that was the path that everybody had to follow. And that was just, you couldn't question it. And when I look at masculine and feminine energies, I don't really look at them as being limited in that way. I don't really look at them as being there's one path that you follow and that's the only thing that you follow. And that's one of the things about discussing it in form of energies. Like feminine energy, so to speak, has so many different archetypes within it. I mean, there's an aspect of feminine energy that is, the sweet, innocent maiden that is sort of like, the Disney princess. And there's the aspect that is the nurturing mother, but there's also the aspect that is the wild woman. There's the wise old woman. There's the sensual lover. There's like the regal queen. There's so many different aspects to feminine energy. And that's actually one of the things that I really love exploring on my YouTube channel. And one of the things that I do is I take like films and I try to break them down into some of the masculine, feminine energies. And some of the films that I've done that have a predominantly feminine character, I love that I get to show different representations of what feminine is, because it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do things a certain way. Like if you look at I'll take some common movies like Legally Blonde shows Elle Woods. Elle Woods is a very feminine character, but she's, bubblegum pink, but she's also in law school. And there's that aspect to the feminine, but there's also like one of my other favorite film breakdowns that I've done is Under the Tuscan Sun with Diane Lane, who's like a writer who moves to Tuscany, and she's an older woman and she's got this very feminine quality. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to fit into a cookie cutter idea of what we've been told being feminine is, because a lot of the aspects to things that we were sort of told being feminine was the idea of like sitting still, not speaking, being seen and not heard, having table manners, those kind of things. Those aren't actual feminine qualities. Those were really just things that women were told to do. But in reality, the nature of the feminine is cyclical. She's emotional. She is connected to nature. She is sort of always dying and rebirthing. That's literally what the menstrual cycle is. That's what the, pregnancy cycles are. We're connected to the moon and the earth and everything. And we are, we're always flowing. We're connected to our intuition. We're speaking our truth. Like all those things are connected to our feminine. And those things, it's creativity. I mean, the feminine literally creates everything. We create life. We create everything. We birth new things, and that's not just necessarily children, but it's everything. And that's going to look different for one woman than it's going to look for another woman. And I think that when you embrace those aspects of yourself, like you find like your version of sensuality, your version of creativity, your version of expressing yourself, connecting to your own intuition and finding your own path, as opposed to saying like, oh, I have to follow this rigid structure of doing this at this time and doing this, because that structure, that's more masculine. Like that's not us connecting to our feminine.
And can I tell you, Sarah, that like this that you just talked about was what got my attention for your content, because the idea I think that a lot of women, young women, have is feminine, submissive.
Yep.
It's almost something that I feel like the moment you think about feminine energy, the first thing that comes to mind is submission.
Mm-hmm.
And just being, excuse the crude language, but like just being somebody's bitch.
Yeah.
And like just sitting there serving coffee and shit, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not gonna do that, man. Like I'll do because I want to, but I'm not gonna do it because it's what is expected from me to do.
Right.
So that's kind of what has always pushed me away from the whole idea of feminine and masculine, because a lot of the content that I had consumed in the past was always like reiterating that it's like, let the men take the lead, and then you just stay there in a very passive form. And if he guesses what you need, then great. But if he doesn't, you just have to accept it. I'm like, fuck that. Nope. Hard pass, man.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the way that he spoke, that's really what got my attention, and it got me like, oh, okay, so that is not really the only way.
I am absolutely, I mean, I do believe in the masculine taking the lead, but I'm very, very strongly against the concept of blind submission for anybody, really. I mean, I don't think that we as a society should be blindly submitting to things. And I don't think that in relationships, people should be blindly submitting to things, because a big aspect, and that's, I talk a lot in my content about the dark feminine and the light feminine. And I think the light feminine, which is kind of that, the sweet, loving, which I love my light feminine. Like I love the light feminine aspects of like being nurturing and being sweet and everything. But the dark feminine is really more, because with the feminine, we're cyclical, we're dark and we're light. And so an aspect of the dark feminine is really, you can be, if you want to call the word submission, I know that word is triggering for a lot of people, but if you want to use the word submission or whatever, or surrender or something, or following your masculine partner, but you should never do that unless you fully trust him. Like you need to have that trust established. That's one of the things that always really bugs me about a lot of the content that comes out. I think sort of like the trad wife stuff, where it's just sort of like, oh, no, the husband's the leader. He's the leader. And I just do what he says. And I think he knows best. And it's like, well, okay, but do you trust him? Do you have a partner who you fully trust? And also, like, I believe that trust is a moment to moment thing, because, we're all human, right? So you can have a partner, you can have a husband that you trust and he's a good man, but is he 100% trustable in every single moment? He's probably not, because he's human. So if he says, I'm going to take the lead in this moment, I'm going to take control. If because it's the feminine, like you're the heart. So you're the heart of the relationship. So if you tune in and you're like, ooh, he's not, like he's in his ego right now, or he's not leading properly, or he's not, you should say something. I mean, just following me, yes, dear, whatever you say, you know best, but you know that he doesn't know best in that moment. If you don't speak up, I mean, it's self-abusive, really, is what it is. I mean, it's really important to call him out. And the thing is that's one of the ways that men and women, particularly in relationships with the masculine and the feminine, it makes him a better man. Like he gets to be better because he gets called out on his shit, really. I mean, if he's off, if he's making, one of my favorite scenes in a movie that I think the whole movie itself, I think just reiterates this so much, is one of my favorite film breakdowns I've ever done, is the film 300. I don't know if you're familiar with that film.
Yeah.
But Leonidas and his queen, I mean, it's like their dynamic in that movie, to me, is so representational of the masculine and the feminine. Especially there's a scene early on in the beginning where, Leonidas he is kind of being tested, like, are you going to go to war? You're not going to go to war. You're crazy. You're not going to go to war. And you can tell he wants to, but it's like, is it really the right thing to do? He's not totally sure if it's the right thing to do. Is he in his ego, or is he really doing what he wants to do? And what does he do? He looks to his queen. He looks to his partner. And she's the one who like connects to his heart and is like, no, you're doing the right thing. You are. Like, he checks in with her, not for permission, but because he's like, okay, I want to do this right now. I'm really hopped up on this. Like, this is my thing. But like, he looks to her and like, she's his heart. Like, he's the head, he's the mind, she's the heart. So it's like, should I do this? And she'll be like, yep. Or if she didn't think he should, she'd be like, no, it's not that she is like, he's still the leader. He's still the one making the decision, but she's the heart that's like, okay, yeah, you're on the right path. Or like, no, you're not on the right path. Like, that's what you have to be an active participant in that, where I think there's the sort of quote unquote traditional way that we look at these things is like, oh, the woman submits, the man does whatever he wants, and whatever he wants is just what she has to deal with. And it's like, no, that's not a recipe for a healthy relationship at all.
And I love that you're mentioning this, because there is one huge pet peeve of mine. It drives me insane. It really triggers me a lot. And I create a lot of content around that because that is one of my big things. So I'm very vocal about women asking for permission to their husbands to invest in their health. And I love that you said that, is he trustable right now? And it's not that a man is not trustable. And I think that you just brought a lot of clarity for what I've been trying to express for a long time. And then we have this woman that is like, oh, I need to speak to my husband and ask for his permission to invest. And I'm like, but he doesn't live in your body. He's not a trustworthy source to make that decision for you, because he does not know the struggles that you live day in and day out. So how is he going to be able to make an educated choice on whether the investment is worthy or not if he does not live and knows what is costing you to be where you are at this given time?
He's not in your body. Yeah.
Yeah. And, there have been several amazing husbands that have jumped on the call and listened to their wives' struggles. And I think that is a partnership.
And that's providing safety as well. Like, being willing to listen. I mean, that's being a provider, providing safety, making her feel safe in that moment, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because then the decision comes from a trusted place, because now she can trust that he knows exactly where she's at.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that's really a pet peeve of mine that I have when women are like, oh, I just stay home. And I'm like, no, you raise his children.
Mm-hmm.
You raise his children, and you cannot trust his decision, not because he's a bad person or untrustworthy, but he just doesn't live in your body. So I love that you mentioned this. So you touched a little bit on masculine energy.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel that also the now we're going into a society that there are a lot of stay-at-home dads? How do you think that, or how do you feel that a man assuming a lot of responsibilities that traditionally speaking have always been more feminine? He's still providing by caring for the kids, but it is traditionally speaking a more feminine role. How do you see from your experience this impacting marriages?
I mean, I'm all for people figuring out what they think that their own dynamic should be in their relationships and in their family life. And, so I can't really give like a blanket diagnosis for every situation. I do think it's really, really important for people, and this is people in general, men or women, whether they're going to go into a more traditional situation or whether they're going to go into a very unconventional situation. It's very important to check in with yourself and to actually ask yourself, okay, is this what I truly want? Or is this something that I'm doing because I think it's the convenient thing, or because it's what somebody else wants me to do? Or, because resentment is probably the biggest destroyer of relationships. So the minute that you get into a situation where one person is resenting the other one, or both people are resenting each other for the role that they're playing in that dynamic, it's going to deteriorate the relationship. So, if the dynamic that's agreed upon by both people is that the woman is going to take on the more traditional masculine role of going out and earning the money, and the man is going to stay at home and take care of the children, if both people are like, yep, that feels like the right thing to do, that's what's aligned for me, that's what I want to do, and that's what works for them, that's on them, that's perfectly acceptable. That said, if one person or even both people feels like, I don't really want this role, I'm doing it because circumstances are such that I feel like I have to do this, or I feel like I have to do this because this is what the other person wants, that's going to destroy the relationship. I mean, it's only going to be able to last for so long before people are just going to, like, that resentment's going to build up, and it's just going to be an issue. And my own personal belief is that for most people at their core, women are designed certain ways biologically and men are designed certain ways biologically. And that's not universal. People can shift and change, but women in general tend to be more of the mentality and more in tune with dealing with children, especially small children. Men tend to be more inclined. I mean, our entire system, our structure of everyday life in the corporate world and things like that is set up on a 24-hour cycle, which is really more aligned with the man's hormone cycle as far as 24 hours, whereas women have, like, on average a 28-day hormone cycle. So the idea of, like, going to a corporate office and sitting in a cubicle, and I mean, none of us as humans are really designed to be sitting in, like, under fluorescent lights in a cubicle as natural humans, but, like,
Yeah.
for men, doing that on a natural cycle is a little bit more normal, whereas for women, going and doing the exact same thing every day is probably going to be more detrimental on a woman for her hormones and for her, mental health and things like that than a man. Whereas for a woman, when you are home taking care of kids and things like where your day is kind of flowing and a little bit different, that tends to be more suitable to women as opposed to men. But I mean, again, I think it's a matter of personal choice. I mean, you can decide what you want to do, but I think it's really important to tune in and pay attention. Like, is this really what I want to do, or am I just doing this because of my partner, what they want? And also paying attention. I think women especially, but both men and women really have to pay attention to, if they are going to have a very more traditional masculine role of being like, all right, I need to check in with my body. Is this affecting my health? Is this, because there's a lot of women right now that experience a lot of hormonal issues, reproductive issues, mental and physical health issues that are coming with living a life that they didn't necessarily choose. They just kind of felt forced into. And I think it's checking in and being like, hey, am I okay? Am I feeling okay? Is my body doing okay with this? And always checking in with yourself.
Couldn't that be said the same thing, Sarah, about, like, also the woman who is, like, who takes on the role of staying home, but her career has always been a big part of her as an individual. And then, because that's something that I see a lot with the ladies that we work with in the Powerhouse Academy, is that they tried to stay home, but they felt lost. They lost the sense of self because their career has always been a big part of their life.
Mm-hmm.
So do you feel that what you're saying, obviously the question was primarily talking about a husband staying home,
mm-hmm.
but do you see that often as well with women also building resentment for all that they're quote unquote missing from not being in the workforce and not furthering their career and things like that? Is that something that you see often when you're speaking to your audience?
I mean, I think it's common, but I think there's also an aspect of, I think some of this is programming, which is so many women today, particularly of, the current generation, so to speak, have been really conditioned from such a young age that we're really defined by our achievements. Like, how much can we achieve? How much? And so it becomes, again, sort of this checklist of like, well, I got this far in my career and I've achieved this and I've done this. And that's not to say, I mean, if women have a career that they really love and they really want to be a part of their life, if they, even if they do decide to maybe take some time off and, raise kids or something and then go back into that, like, I mean, that's, I think everyone should be able to choose what they want to do with their path in life. But I also think too that oftentimes with women, that obsession with needing to achieve something can come from feeling like your worth is not, like you don't have a worth or a value if you're not in a career making a paycheck and achieving things, because we do have a very masculine oriented society. So we do really teach women, I mean, in the same way we were talking about men being providers and it being more than a paycheck, we really do put a huge emphasis in our society on the person earning the paycheck as being the one that has the most value. And there's an aspect to things of saying, okay, if you're staying at home and you're taking care of a family, it doesn't mean you have less value as a person. And now if you really are feeling like I miss something else in life and I've lost myself, I don't think that as women necessarily staying home and raising kids that their entire life should just be cooking and cleaning and doing laundry and taking care of kids. You're going to need something else. I mean, if anything, you're going to need some like alone time with your husband to actually be husband and wife and be in a relationship. And you're going to need time with women in your life, and having a sisterhood is important too. And, having things, I do think that sometimes that happens when as women, you feel like, okay, I'm a stay-at-home wife and mother now. That's all I am, and that's all I'm going to be. And
it becomes their identity.
It becomes your identity and stuff. And I think sometimes then they'll start missing a career or missing that, because it's like, well, at least I defined myself as that. And if you want to define yourself as that and you want to have that career, that's fine. But also, can you also define yourself as a good friend, a good partner, a good woman in general? Like, can you define yourself as something other than, or like motherhood doesn't have to be the only thing that you are, and probably shouldn't be, because I mean, that's really not going to be healthy for the kids either in the long term.
That's kind of what I was going to say. It becomes a huge responsibility in small children or big children, because whenever they're gone, you have nothing to kind of like hold on to, or like, and then you start to put that responsibility of you not being not having anything to do as far as like take care of your kids and things like that, because they're no longer at home. Then you completely lost your identity. But okay, so with what you're saying, I have I have a lot of personal opinions about that might not necessarily align with what you're saying. And I think that that's the beauty of the conversation, is to have great minds can differ, because I feel that a lot of times whenever the woman is putting herself in that position of just being the carer, she's opening a lot of doors to be vulnerable, which I have seen time and time again, to what you call unhealthy masculinity, which is, that control. Because especially whenever it comes to money, there are going to be men, because you would be naive of us to not address that, that there are going to be men who are going to take advantage of that position of control. And he can be the best man in the world, but you only know when shit hits the fan.
Exactly.
And are going to take advantage of that position of control, financial control, leadership control, and manipulate that woman because she hasn't been able to create something for her. And obviously, I understand that you cannot live thinking on worst case scenarios, but it would be very naive and stupid of all of us to say that, oh, that's not going to happen. No, because it happens every fucking day.
Oh, exactly.
So what can we do as mothers, as women, as, a society, to make sure that we're cultivating what we call a healthy masculine energy? And what is even a healthy masculine energy?
Well, so a healthy masculine energy, I mean, there's, I know people don't like the term toxic masculinity. Everyone gets upset about that and whatever. And if people are triggered by that term and they want to use a different term, I don't care. Like, I'm not hung up on the terms, but at the end of the day, like, there is I kind of refer to it more as wounded masculine, but there is a masculine way that men can, and women can do this as well. But if we're talking about men being in more wounded masculine, that actually will take advantage of. I mean, I look at it from the perspective of, there's a man who will, he may fight, he may injure someone to protect his family. That would be a healthy masculine. If he just decides to go and get into a bar fight and punch someone because it makes him feel like more of a man, that's wounded masculine. So like, he's still hurting someone.
The dick swinging.
Yeah,
I
it's
call
like
that the dick swinging.
exactly. It's like, am I going to hurt someone out of my ego? That would be unhealthy masculine. Whereas, am I potentially going to hurt someone because I need to protect someone who's vulnerable? That would be your healthy masculine. So that's just one example. There's so many examples. But the reality is as women, for one thing, when we are in a healthy feminine energy, we're less likely to attract men who are in that wounded masculine, because a wounded masculine or unhealthy masculine is going to be more drawn to a woman who is what I would call it in a less healthy feminine, of kind of being the victim, of being the one who can't actually stand up, speak up. Those are the guys that are like, I need a submissive woman, when really they just want a woman who just agrees with everything they say. Like that's the dynamic. And you have to be careful. And again, as women, it is hard to know, like, okay, what is he going to be like, again, like you said, when shit hits the fan. And so it's hard to know that specifically. And there's different aspects to this. I mean, I know I've talked to some people, because there was a time in history when women themselves weren't the only ones choosing a partner. They had, father figures and brothers and stuff that stepped in and were like, okay, we're going to determine whether this man is a proper man for a partner. And we're not in that world. And I don't necessarily know if that's a world that we really want to go back to necessarily. But as women, we have such an incredible power of intuition. We have such an incredible power. And I really do believe that so many aspects of our current society disconnects women from our innate power, that power in our body, that heart wisdom, that when we know what's going to happen. I mean, if you really look at most women, and I think most women, if they were really being honest with themselves, any negative thing that's ever really happened to them, particularly if you're talking about relationships and stuff, if you ask them and you say, like, did you know that was going to happen? Or did you have any
the red
instinct?
flags
Most
were
women are going to be like, yeah, I knew that was going to happen. I knew. I maybe didn't know the exact details, but like, yeah, I knew that was going to happen. But we don't trust that. We don't trust that part of ourselves that says, like, ooh, that man's not safe. Or like, we kind of convince ourselves that, oh, okay, yeah, that guy had that like aggressive red flag when I first started dating him, but like, oh, he'll calm down. Or like the biggest one I see right now is like, I feel like so many women think that the man is going to change. Like, he'll step up and be a father when we have kids. Like, he'll step up and be a good man when we have kids. And then they have kids with him, and then they're like, wait,
he's still a piece of shit.
He didn't become a good man. Yeah. And I think as women, we have to learn to connect to our intuition, which is very difficult for many women today, because we're taught not to trust it. We're taught to like, oh, you're just being crazy, or your standards are too high, or, oh, you're asking for too much, or, oh, just give them a chance, or something like that. And we don't learn to tune into our own intuition and say, like, okay, I see something wrong here. I need to trust that. I need to know that that's something that might happen. And it doesn't mean necessarily that you're never going to get yourself in a bad situation. We all have to learn our lessons in life. Yeah. But if we learn to tune in and say, okay, this guy's being a jerk now, like, it's probably not going to change after we get married. It's probably not going to change. Yeah. And it probably isn't going to change for the better. Like, how does this man handle himself? Like, when little things happen, like when a little situation happens, how well does he handle this? And it's going to give you more of an indication of like what's going to happen. And I mean, I've had to learn these lessons the hard way. Believe me, I learned these lessons in divorce court. So like, I understand, like, sometimes life just has to fall apart for you to get like the wake up call of like, oh man, I should have paid attention to that one and stuff. Yeah. But it's learning to trust yourself and trust your own intuition and also know that you will call a man out when because if a man's in an unhealthy masculine, and obviously I want women to be safe. If you're in a dangerous situation or anything like that, like, please, whatever you have to do to make yourself safe. I'm not telling you if a man is like being violent, you just call him out and be like, get in his face or something. Like, you always have to be safe. But, it's most men that are in an unhealthy masculine are not going to tolerate a woman who is strong and grounded in her ability to speak up and is willing to call him out when he's not trustable or not in alignment. I mean, and you're going to kind of scare off a lot of those men because they're not going to want to deal with that. So the more that you as a woman are trusting your own intuition, and you're also able to speak up and you're able to speak your mind and speak your truth and call a man out when he needs to be called out, you're going to kind of weed out some of the guys that are going to be more in that sort of unhealthy, toxic kind of masculine energy.
And I love that you said it. He's going to change because it cracks me up. My husband is a phenomenal dad.
Mhm.
Like he's an amazing, amazing dad. And people are like, you're just so lucky that your husband is a good dad. And I'm like, not choosing to reproduce with an asshole has nothing to do with luck.
Mhm.
Stop it.
Exactly.
And and it's funny whenever you said that. So, but I think that one thing to kind of like start to close out, Sarah, that is important for us to speak about is that whenever we talk about masculine and feminine, it's not so much about trying to impress the opposite sex because it almost sometimes, and it's being used for that quite a lot. If you open TikTok, if you open social media all over the place, it's kind of like, if you want to get a man like this, and I hate the idea of adjusting and becoming something just for the sole purpose
Mm.
of attracting something or someone. I absolutely hate that.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that it's just very important for us to make it clear that this is not about like creating yourself just for the sole purpose of
Mhm.
attracting or matching up with your husband. But what would you say that are the benefits of stepping into your own energy, your own feminine energy as a woman, that has nothing to do with mating or with finding somebody? Because a lot of the ladies listening to
Mhm.
this, they're already taken.
Mhm.
So what would you say there are the main benefits for a woman to really become more in tune with their feminine side?
Well, that's actually, I mean, that's one of the things. And I know I probably could have a bigger following and stuff if I started marketing my stuff like, do this and you'll find a husband, or do this and you'll find a man. But I don't like doing that. I don't like talking about things like that, because at the end of the day, I really do believe that, I mean, this goes for men as well, but I think for women, connecting to your feminine energy is for yourself, and it should always be for yourself. It should always be a gift for yourself. And one of the biggest things that I'll hear from women is they'll be like, well, I don't want to connect to my feminine energy. I don't want to be feminine because I don't want to be something that I'm not. And connecting to your feminine energy should never feel like you are trying to be someone that you're not. In reality, it should feel like you are becoming the person that you were always meant to be. It should really feel like you're just like letting go of all the things that society told you that you have to be, and just connecting back to who you actually are. It should always feel like that. So I never want, and to be honest, it might feel phony at first, depending on how much you are in a more masculine energy or things like that. There are some women who are going to have resistance, especially if they've been told that, being more feminine is weak, or being more feminine is a bad thing, or something like that.
Submissive.
Yeah. Or like, yeah, they have like trigger words like that and things like that. I think it's really important to, you may actually come against blockages and things like that to that, but it's always going to feel like you're coming back home, like you're coming back to yourself. And so
Mm-hmm.
I don't really go for the phony thing. And one of the things that I always say to people is like, okay, so say you do all these things, you connect to your feminine energy, you become more feminine, you connect to all these things, and you have a husband, or you find a partner or something like that. He's a human man. He's probably going to make a mistake at some point in the course of your relationship. And if you've only been doing these things to like make him happy or to get him or something like that, the first time he screws up, you're just going to throw it all away, because you're going to be like, to hell with this. Like, I'm not going to do this for
Yeah.
him. And it's because he's human. He's a human man. And, I mean, assuming he didn't screw up royally or something like that. Like, if
Yeah.
you're doing it for another person, it's not going to be as effective as knowing that you yourself are worthy of being in your feminine energy, because it's just, you're going to be better overall. Your relationship will probably be better, but that's not really the only reason to do it, because your romantic relationship will probably improve, but your friendships will probably improve. Your relationship with your children will probably improve. Your relationships with your career will probably improve. Like, your relationship with everything will improve, and your relationship with yourself will improve as well, which is really the most important relationship you're ever going to have, because I mean, you're with yourself longer than any other relationship you're ever going to have in life, because you're there from, the beginning till the end. So
Yeah.
cultivating that relationship is really, it's the most important one, because it also, like, the reflection of yourself and how you feel about yourself is going to come out in every other area of your life. So connecting to that feminine energy and really coming back home to yourself should always be for yourself first. And other things are going to kind of fall into place when that happens, but
Yeah.
it should always be for yourself first.
Yeah, no, I love that we were able to cover that because I think that it can feel like, oh, you have to act like, because I've seen a lot of content like that. And this is gonna be my last question, I promise. It changes. It has its ebbs and flows with the energy and things like that. And whenever you're married, a lot of our ladies are married, and that can change, like the flow. So what are like, if there is a lady that finds herself in a relationship where maybe she had to take on a little bit more of the masculine role just because that's what it was needed at that specific time, and then the man by default, because of the polarity, took on the more feminine role.
So common.
Like how like, yeah, and I'm sure, I think I heard you say before that it is something that is impacting a lot of marriages. How do you, and again, I don't want to get back to the checklist, but just some things to keep in mind to try and get that polarity back to where you go back to your feminine and your husband or partner goes back to the masculine, because that's, I feel, where a lot of men operate best. How do you make that transition if out of necessity the woman had to step into her masculine in a already existing relationship?
Yeah, so common. I mean, I'd say it's probably one of the number one issues that people are having in relationships now, is that reversed polarity where women are feeling like they have to. I mean, you see it even in sitcoms where it's like the kind of like the dad is kind of like this, just another kid, and like the wife has to mother the husband and stuff.
Everybody.
And it's this absolute dynamic. And that's gonna kill the sexual attraction, because as women, like we're not sexually attracted to a guy who's acting like a child. And that tends to be what more like men who are in their more feminine energy tend to be more childlike in that sense. That's what we associate usually. So that dynamic is so common. So if women are listening and they're like, hey, I'm in that dynamic right now, please know you are not alone. And you can potentially shift to that polarity instantly. It can happen because polarity is a moment to moment thing. That said, it's a matter of how many blocks do you have to being in your feminine, and how many blocks does your husband have to being in his masculine. Like that's kind of where it is. So like technically speaking, if say you were in a dynamic where you were realizing that, okay, you're mothering your partner and he's kind of being a child or something like that, if you then do something that is more feminine, like you don't have a block to it, you kind of click into that. Like maybe you start doing something very sensual, or you really do something that's like connecting to, your feminine energy somehow, or you do something more playful or something more silly or something where you're connecting more to your feminine energy. If you don't have any blockages to that and you can manage to do that, if he doesn't have any blockages to being in his masculine, he could potentially instantly be like, okay, I'm going to be in the masculine. Like I've even seen it with couples in groups and stuff where when a man is kind of being a little bit more flowy and stuff, and the woman is much more rigid, and then the woman starts flowing, or like the man will get more rigid. Like it's kind of that, it's that balance. Now, if he's resenting her for having been in her masculine for too long, he may have a blockage to that. So you may have to work through that. It may not necessarily happen right away. If she's resenting him for acting like a child, and so she's kind of like hesitant, that's where things may take a little bit of time to shift, but they can shift instantly. Because I'm sure you probably noticed in your marriage where like, if your husband like does something very masculine, like you said, you're like, ooh, I'm turned on right now. Like it's like an instant thing. It's just sort of like if he like steps into that structure, and you're obviously you have a very strong connection to your masculine energy, but you're just like, okay, I'm open now. Like I'm in my feminine now. You know what I mean? Like it can happen instantly.
I'll tell him, I'm like, if you're trying to seduce me, it's working.
Yeah, exactly. But if you think about how fun that is, like how playful that is, or like if you say like you have a man who's maybe he said he was going to clean out the garage or something, and he's he just hasn't done it. So he's not really keeping his word. You're like, oh, he's feeling really flighty. He's really like, as if you kind of like go up to him sensually and be like, do you know how much it would turn me on if you cleaned out the
Yeah.
garage? Like something like that. Like, so he's now like, oh, okay. Well, when I'm more manly, she's more turned on and she's more in her
Hmm.
feminine and stuff. And it's going to vary from couple to couple. I mean, it's hard to give like
Yeah.
a blanket statement,
Generalized
but
advice.
it's you may have to just do a little bit at a time. And I think like
Yeah.
you don't necessarily want people to feel like if they've been in a dynamic like that for a really long time, if they have to like force something. If it doesn't shift immediately, these things might take away.
Hmm.
It probably took a while for people to get into these patterns. So it may take a little while for them to get out of the pattern. But I think it's
Hmm.
just the more that you as a woman start tapping into your feminine energy for yourself, because that's what's important, your partner is going to feel that and it's going to start to feel like, ooh, okay, maybe I'm going to want to take on more of the structure and take on more of
Yeah.
the responsibility. If he notices that gets a positive result, then he's going to, I mean, if you think about it, I'm sure your husband probably mows the lawn more knowing that it turns you on,
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah.
So,
Oh,
yeah.
he's like doing all the things at home. Like I came home the other day, the doors were fixed, all the things, and I'm like, oh yeah, ooh, sexy. And but I think that a big part of that is actually communication as well and
Yeah.
praising, because that's one thing that I personally notice is like the more I start to pray. And not to sound like a mother, but like it's a bit like your kid. Whenever your kid does something that is good, you praise the behavior that you want to be repeated.
Right.
And
Well, it's human nature. Yeah.
yeah, and then like every time that he did something like that, I'm like, ooh, that's sexy. And it started to become a thing. So I really think that the communication and being open to praise when that behavior that you want happens, I think is a big key as well. At least it has been for me.
And genuine too. I mean, like it genuinely turns you on. Like if
Yeah.
he did something that it didn't really turn you on, you're not going to be like, oh, that turns me on so much. Because I mean, I think there's a lot of women that are just like, well, I don't want to have to pretend that something turns me on just so he'll do it. And it's like, well, you don't pretend that it does. If it turns you on, then tell him it turns you on. If it makes you happy,
Yeah.
like if it makes you joyful, like it doesn't necessarily have to be just a sexual thing, but like if something he does makes you happy and joyful, show him or tell him that it made you happy and joyful. Like, I mean, I think,
Hmm.
again, like openly communicating that thing. Or in reverse, if he does something that hurts you, let him know that it hurt you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Let him know. Like, I think, I mean, again, it goes back to the resentment thing. Like, when we let things, women oftentimes feel like we have to like keep our mouths shut and like not speak up, and we hold it all inside, and then it'll come out later in some big explosion of anger about something that had nothing to do with anything. It's like, yeah, better to just like, okay, no, this hurt me, like this bothered me, like let him know. If something makes you angry, if he does something that makes you angry, let him know that you're angry. Like, I mean, you have to let him know in that moment. And that's connecting to your feminine. I mean, all those feelings, those emotions, like what's coming up in response to what he's doing, all that stuff is very feminine energy, which is it's going to be a turn on for a man. Now, he may not love that what he did was making you angry or hurting you or something like that, and his ego might kick in and stuff. But if he really loves you and cares about you, he's going to want to know that what he did hurt you or what he did made you upset,
Yeah.
or that what he did made you happy or turned on or something like that.
Yeah, I love that. Sarah, thank you so much for your time, for your knowledge, for changing my mind about a lot of things as well.
I'm honored. Thank you.
Yeah. So if you could share with the audience where they can find you, what's the best way to stay in touch with your content and the stuff that you put out? Because I really do think it's very valuable. So if you could tell the peoples.
People's. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to talk to you. If people want more of my content, I am Everyday Starlet on YouTube and TikTok. If you're on there, I am at Sarah Blodgett on Instagram. You can look me up there. I have a website, Everyday Starlet. I have some online courses. They're self-study things if you want to learn more. And yeah, feel free to find me on social media. Reach out. Yeah, I'd love to hear from any of you.
Love it. And I'm going to put all the links in the show notes as well. So if you guys don't really know how to spell stuff, because I know her last name, it took me a bit to even know how to pronounce it. So there is that. So we're going to have everything down in the show notes. So you guys can just click it. Go check out Sarah. Her stuff is really like very eye opening, and it really gets you thinking. So Sarah, thank you for your time once again.
Thank you so much.
I'll keep on looking at your stuff on Instagram. I love it. Bye bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in this week. But let me ask you, what was your aha moment in today's episode? I would love to know. You can leave me a comment or voice message at the link in the show description. You can also follow me on Instagram and let me know what topics you want to hear more about or who I should have on the show. As for today, this is it for today, guys. I'll see you back next week for another episode of the Unfiltered Fit Life podcast.